And together, we will move mountains. And if they don't hear our message, then we'll just do it over and over and over and over 1,000 times again for you. And I'll rise up, I'll rise like the day, I'll rise up in spite of I will rise, we will rise, we will rise, we will rise.
Hi, everyone. My name is Michelle Zabel, and I'm an Assistant Dean at the University of Maryland School of Social Work and Director at the Institute for Innovation and Implementation. As you all know, this year of working virtually has necessitated some really creative approaches to conferences. We've spread the training institutes out over the last 9 months, just a few workshops each month. And I just want to personally thank you for joining in these discussions. These workshops have been so much richer because of you sharing your experiences and ideas to meet the needs of children, youth, young adults, and their families. So today, I have the exciting opportunity to remind you of some general housekeeping items. Even in a virtual world, they don't let me out of this part. Our workshops are being recorded, and your participation does imply consent. Also, please remember, if at any time you need help in navigating through the virtual spaces or accessing the links to workshops, we have a live help desk chat that is being monitored during the duration of the entire workshop. Our team is posting the link to connect with the live help desk in the chat box now. During all the workshops being offered throughout this series, I really want to encourage you to actively participate by using the chat to post your questions, any comments, and any resources you want to share with your colleagues. Our presenters absolutely want to hear from you, and we know your participation makes the workshops even better. We have staff monitoring the chat in Zoom and on YouTube, and they'll be assisting with facilitating the questions to the presenters and making sure that the presenters' resources are shared with you. So finally, there'll be an ASL interpreter available throughout the workshops. Interpreters will be shown on your screen, and they can be pinned for those who require interpretation. So you want to hover over the video and select the 3 dots. One of the options that appears is pin video. So by selecting that pin video, this video will now not move out of view. This summer, we are continuing the training institutes in a way that will allow you to take us wherever you go. So hopefully you're getting to take a break, a vacation, and get some relaxation. We're recording our summer workshops and releasing them each month so you can watch them anytime during the month that actually works for you. These workshops are on a wide range of topics, all focused on strengthening your skills as you support youth and families. While you're enjoying these summer workshops, we're going to be planning and working towards future training institutes, and hopefully we can all see each other in person. Thank you so much. Take care and enjoy your summer.
Absolutely. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate you giving up an afternoon and spending time with us. We think we have some great information to share with you around engaging families and developing leadership, which is so foundational for effective systems of care. I would like to take a moment and say thank you to my colleague, Ann Smith, who's joining us from Hartford, Connecticut, where she's the executive director of the African Caribbean American Parents of Children with Disabilities Incorporated, otherwise known as AFCAM. So you'll hear that during our presentation. She's an absolute pleasure to work with and has used her extensive experience to improve the lives of children, youth, and families, as well as improve the systems who support them. So she has compelling information to share with you today. And thank you, Ann, for helping out and being a major presenter.
Well, thank you, Pat. It has certainly been a pleasure having this opportunity to work with you and this opportunity to present at the Training Institutes Live. I have had the opportunity to work with Pat, and we decided that rather than share with you the same details that are in our bios, we would pick out one thing that we learned about each other and share that with you. And so it was really quite gratifying and exciting to find out that Pat and I actually shared some unusual work habits that we think are pretty unique, but that we found we both shared, and they allowed us to be quite productive. And so it has been my pleasure to work with Pat, and we are looking forward to being able to provide you with some tools, some tips, and some resources this afternoon. Thank you for being with us.
Absolutely. The learning objectives for today are on the screen in front of you. We don't need to read them to you, but we do want to say, number one, a huge welcome to you, and thank you for joining us. You should, by the end of this, really be able to recognize opportunities to engage family members in all aspects of program services, in program management, and in policy. So I'd like to reiterate that we invite you to put your questions and comments in the box, and we'll answer those at the end. And I'd like to turn it over to Anne to talk about, ask you some good questions here.
So we'd like to start out by finding out who's in the room with us today. So if you wouldn't mind taking this first poll, tell us, what is your role that has brought you to our session today? I do see that we have some responses coming in the chat as well. And we'll give it just another moment or so, and we'll then see what the results of our poll are. Peer coach, we're seeing consultant, retired program director, and here are our results. And so it looks like the overwhelming majority of our participants are family, parent, peer support, but closely followed by supervisors and administrators. And I'm encouraged to see that. It'll be something that you will find we point to later on in our presentation. So thank you to each and every one who has responded to the poll or in the chat box. So why family engagement? Why would we be dedicating today's session to that? And why have you all come to be with us today? Because authentic family engagement is what is required amongst the many resources that our children, youth, and families need in order to be able to get the best outcomes from any of the services that they are able to access. Family engagement is one of the underpinnings of the system of care, and it has in its application across many systems, because what we do know is that our children and families need supports from multiple systems when they are coming to us, and that family engagement is key to them being able to be engaged effectively across those systems. Family engagement is essential for sustainability, and it is also where we have found that outcomes are enhanced, because amongst those resources, we know that families are a unique resource. There are multiple levels of resources, and there are multiple levels of family involvement. When we are working with you today, we hope to be able to help those of you who may not understand those distinctions to have a greater appreciation for the different levels of family engagement that there are. And for those of you that are already doing that work and have advanced in your level of doing it, we would be challenging you to open up your mind and open up to ideas and innovations to enhance and better promote even what you are doing in terms of family engagement. So what are some of those multiple levels of involvement? We know that you can do minimal involvement of families. You can check a box. You can say, well, we had a policy that we had already created, and we did all of the work, and then we had some parents take a look at it and check off on what we did. That is a minimal level. We can increase that. It can be really authentic engagement, and at its best, it is a partnership. It is a partnership where agencies and service providers, systems and policymakers bring to the table their areas of expertise, but that they join in partnership with the family. Because when you really take a look at how delivery of services to our families, our children, and our youth is best implemented, all of those parties that I named earlier may be involved in the delivery of services for a time. But the family is the constant. The family is the stability. The family is always there. They are the constant in that equation. So that is why we will focus today on how do we move through those levels from involvement to engagement into authentic partnership. True partnership is really something that will bring invaluable contribution to what the outcomes of service delivery are. We will share with you today some examples that we have where we know that the value of family partnership transforms systems and service delivery, that we have changes in institutional culture and institutional practice, that we build awareness, understanding, and self-efficacy and help our parents, our youth, our families to be able to have a sense of community, but also to be able to contribute to the services and to influence policies so that there will be better servicing and better outcomes for youth and families. It improves individual outcomes, and it also improves organizational outcomes and agency outcomes. And it informs systems at the highest level about resource realignment, service development, research and evaluation, and public policy. True partnership is something that contributes to making the services that our families receive be the services that our families need. And there is a saying that he who lives it knows it. So our families, our youth, and our children are the ones who know whether what we are providing to them is truly helping them and is truly helping them to achieve their goals and their outcomes as well as those that the agency or the program may have. So when we are looking at making that contribution and really moving our agencies and our systems through the levels of family engagement to get to true partnership, we know that getting to that level has some challenges. There are challenges around removing barriers and changing mindsets. There are hurdles to overcome. But this movement has been over the couple of decades, has advanced tremendously. That is not to say that we don't have quite a ways to go. We're going to talk about some of those areas where we feel we can have greater improvement and innovation and collaboration within the systems of care and other systems that serve our children and families. We know that there are multiple roles that the families can play. And I'm going to ask my colleague, Pat, to take us through somewhat some of those roles might be.
Thank you, Anne. I want folks to really understand this is a really basic beginning list and way to think about this. There are lots and lots of roles, regardless of the location of service, whether it's community-based, in-home, residential, hospital, lots and lots of roles that families can play in those in the service systems. And some of these are just examples, but we always have to think about how about in continuous quality improvement, evaluation, leadership development, training and supporting not only one another, but helping the clinical field with struggles that they have around engagement and working with families and getting good information to families. Training professionals and strategic communications are also a couple other thoughts. So I wouldn't want anybody to look at this like it is the list. It is far from the list. And feel free as you move forward to continue to think about new ways to engage and involve families. And at the child and family level, obviously in making team-based decisions, in being staff, family staff who provide parent and youth peer support, who provide respite services. Many organizations have in their contracts information and referral. Families are a great resource for that. In warm lines, hotlines, or helpline services, helping people navigate being liaisons from agencies to families and family-run organizations is another key area. So I think, you have a good beginning list here. There's lots and lots of ways. Some of the prerequisites around this, like what does it take? What does it take to do this work? I think so often we talk about what it is, but not what it takes. And what it takes is not as easy as what it sounds. It requires a commitment of leadership and resources and funding and shared responsibility. If we're going to get to partnership, we have to share both risk and reward. So we talk about partnerships with families and family organizations, really that moving forward calls for conversations and relationship building in alignment of goals. So, you share the responsibility. So it really, one of the returns on investment, for example, would be that no one person has the sole responsibility for the outcome anymore. You share the risk, you share the reward. And so when young people and their families have positive outcomes, everybody shares in that because you've worked as equal partners. It also calls for policies and procedures. And if we're going to not only have families engaged in all of these different arenas and opportunities, it can't be an add-on. And how are you going to sustain it? Thinking of that from the very beginning is important. And that often requires a policy piece. I think so often this work happens with good intent. And so unfortunately, when it's not really written in or becomes standard practice or written into sort of the protocols and processes that happen, we stand to lose it because it's been the commitment of a few well-intentioned people. And as we know, people change roles all the time. families move all the time, so it could be dependent upon the agency that they're involved with. So it's a great opportunity to really talk about. And the value creation is really about the heart of the matter. I think that's the common understanding. People come to this work for the heart of the matter. And families see that all the time. And seeing and using teaching moments with one another. I know it's been, it's often happens when I've been in meetings when people who are not family members are listening to families and they don't feel they can ask clarification. A family may say, well, families need, or families want, or whatever, and people don't feel like they can ask the question, how do you know that? Did you do a survey? Do you attend, did you attend a support group? Did you learn it at a conference? Help us understand how you know that, because it's the responsibility of families who are involved in some of these levels of care, particularly around policy decisions and agency decisions, to have more global knowledge of families rather than their own experience. So the items on here, this you'll notice was designed as a mobile. And I noticed it looks like they were really clever and used some form of wire. So these don't all get mixed up and cross each other. If any of you have ever had children with those little baby mobiles in their cribs, you find them often tangled up when they can move enough to reach or kick at them. This is pretty clean. It says positive outcomes through partnerships and trust require communication, respect, equality, competence, advocacy, and commitment. So it displays these principles in their relationship in that mobile way. And each principle plays its own important role in holding up the mobile. But the cornerstone to its entire foundation is going to be talked about by Anne, which is trust, equity, and advocacy. Thank you, Anne.
Thank you, Pat. Pat mentioned a couple of principles and other ideas in her comments that I just wanted to bring a little bit of focus on. Relationship building, it's key. And it's critical to any conversation around trust. And you have to understand that relationship building takes time. It takes mutual commitment. And it is something that can really be challenging because it requires changing. It might be changing the way you think, changing your perspective on things. The shared risk and reward is also a really key element when we're talking about the cornerstone of partnership. Partnership and trust. Trust rests on a mutual commitment and mutual collaboration to really say what it is that you're going to do and do what it is that you said you were going to do. But that you're not just doing that alone and from your own perspective, but you're taking into consideration the impact of your choices on the others in that partnership. And as you work through challenges, and we're back to some of those hurdles, barriers, and mindset changes that we have to go through, it becomes really, really key that people are open to knowledge beyond just what they may know, what their cultural norms might be, what their own individual preferences are. So they need to be open to hearing and validating what are some of those values of the others with whom they are building trust. Trust is I want to say two-way, but that's only when it's just two individuals. I want to say that trust is multifaceted and that it takes that much more work to build trusting relationships when you're talking about systems, when you're talking about providers and services, and you're talking about families, when you're talking about children, because children do not grow up in a vacuum. Children grow up in families, and we need to be looking at how we can build trust with those families, respect privacy and confidentiality, and ultimately just really try to build this partnership where you can enhance each other or you can enhance each of the partners in that relationship. And so trust is also key if we're talking about equity and advocacy. And of course, there's lots of conversation about that today, but that's not a new conversation. And it's something that has really been at the foundation of family engagement from its inception, because it's building, yes, this trusting partnership, which requires then that there's a distribution of power and decision-making, and that everybody's input is valued. And so that element of equity is an important underpinning of our family engagement partnership building. And we want to talk also, when we're looking at the shared power base, we also want to talk about advocacy. It's really important and it's necessary. Advocacy does not always have to be adversarial. Advocacy can be a tool to advance policy, to implement changes, to get to a place where all of the individuals that are involved in that process feel like they can come to the table and advocate for what they need and be heard. Now, that's not to say that there are not times when advocacy does have to be adversarial, because that is also an element of where we have reached. Over the decades, there have been some tough conversations, and there have been some very difficult periods where building trust and partnership and collaboration were not as widespread as they are today. But we have made a lot of progress. We have a ways to go. When we are looking at how we are putting that into practice, because it's great for us to talk about these principles and these words, and we can keep it on that level, but that won't be very helpful to you all. And we did say to you that part of our goal was to try to give you some strategies and goals that you can use to elevate your family engagement, if you're already doing that, or really even to engage at the starting point if you really haven't been involved in doing that, and advancing to the level, maybe you are at the involvement level and you want to move to engagement, and you ultimately want to get to true partnership. So what does it look like? So putting it into practice, I learned from the founding executive director of AFCAMP that what we needed to do was to meet families where they are, not where we think they are, not where we would like them to be, but where they are. So we want to make sure that what we are working on is around connecting families with parent-peer support, because we know that parents and peers can communicate with each other in ways that perhaps therapists cannot, clinicians cannot, educators cannot. So the value of peer support has been proven and is a key element of putting true partnership into practice. Again, attending to equity, but setting realistic expectations. And I know on our slide we have setting realistic expectations with the family. I think that that can also be another one of those areas where you want to make sure that you've got an introspective eye on it as well. Because sometimes the expectations of service providers are not realistic for the family with whom they are working. So setting realistic expectations across the board is very, very key and very critical. And I had already talked about our children not growing up in a vacuum. So that's where we're looking at the whole child and the whole family. But I'd like to hear from our participants now about some of the strategies that they are using in their agencies to achieve partnership with families. And so again, we would ask you to participate in this poll. Do you have strategies for achieving partnership with families in your agencies? And as we are seeing the poll results come in, there might also be some in the chat, so I want to make sure that we take a look at that. Want to encourage you to really be thinking about what is it that you're doing in your agency? What are the things that you're thinking about doing? And we hope that it will lead at the end of the presentation to encouraging you to think about what are some of the things that you can try that you have not done yet. So I think we can go ahead and close the poll at this time. And what we have somewhat developed at 45%. That's really good to hear. And followed second place by yes, well developed. I would love for folks to pop in the chat some of those specific strategies that they are using that bring them to that place of being well developed. Also, would really also like to ask that those who may not be at that level think now about what are some of the barriers and challenges to them reaching that level of being well developed. So with that, I'm going to also at this time ask that we take a look at some specific examples of what it might look like to have a strategy that advances partnership with families.
So in families receiving services, some of the examples would be engaging in decision about their own child's care, ensuring continuity. We know very often families are the voice. As Ann referred to earlier, they're the constant voice. They're that one constant in their child's life who can carry the message across services, across needs, across systems, and providing key information to inform treatment goals and key elements of the plan of care. The only way it's going to work, a plan of care is going to work, is if you have real concrete buy-in. And hopefully it isn't just buy-in. Hopefully it comes from the families to begin with. What are those goals? And having concrete conversations with them in the relationship that we talked about earlier, where you can have complex conversations around treatment goals, and everyone can be heard. So families are really part of setting those goals and identifying the challenges and quality issues. And, we know studies tell us that families care about having a say in their child's treatment and planning. And the quality of the relationship between service providers and families influences treatment engagement dramatically. Think about that. The quality of relationship is what influences the engagement in treatment. Think about that for young people. Think about that for their families as you move forward and continue to develop what the last poll certainly says you've been doing. Families are likely to withdraw from services if they feel excluded by service providers. And a family's worldview and cultural beliefs can affect their engagement. So having those, it isn't just getting to know that you're at my door. It's getting to know a bit about you and what your journey's been and what's important in your life that would help me better serve you. And so that's a great way, I think, to begin to think about how to relate to and how to really engage the families that you want to engage in their own care. The system of care values around services strengthen and empower families, keep children in the least restrictive settings in their homes and communities wherever possible, and that families have a voice in system development. Those are really core tenets of the system of care. Where I think we have failed is moving from principle to practice. And I don't mean any particular person. I think when I say we, that's sort of the collective. I think we have not yet met families where they are. And we need to really hear where they want to go. And I think we need to understand a little bit more about the families that we serve when they do show up. And one of the ways to think about that, the broader picture of experience for families, not every family, but I want to take a minute because we use that word family so often. And I want us to think about the who. Who are these families? What have they gone through before we meet them? So for children and youth with mental health needs and their families, the route to treatment is very often challenging and complicated by the very agencies intended to support them. We talked earlier about best intentions. Missed opportunities lead more intensive and intrusive interventions by juvenile justice and child welfare as sort of those default, I use the term solution in air quotes, as my grandson would say, in air quotes. One of the early markers on this route relates to problems at school. So a 2018 national survey of family-run organizations done by Fredler was dedicated to children's mental health, indicated a majority of families initially reach out for parent support because their child is having difficulty at school. And studies consistently show that 65 or 70% of youth held in American juvenile detention centers have a diagnosable mental illness. Diagnosable mental illness. Additionally, a 2004 congressional study concluded that every day, and I have to pause and think about every day, approximately 2,000 youth are incarcerated simply because community mental health services are unavailable. Up to 80% of children in foster care have significant mental health issues, compared to approximately 18 to 22% of the general population. And factors contributing to the mental and behavioral health of children and youth in foster care include a history of complex trauma, frequently changing situations and transitions, broken family relationships, inconsistent and inadequate access to mental health services, and the overprescribing of psychotropic medications. For families, the various pathway to and through systems have been formed by elements of confusion, fear, disappointment, frustration, desperation, and betrayal, often leaving their children to be counted in the data that I just quoted to you. In order to understand the unparalleled opportunity to shift the course of life for children, youth, and families, It's important to understand the landscape that impacts their journey and to get to know the solutions that families bring to the table. So Anne, I'd like to move that to you to talk about an evidence-based model.
And before I do that, Pat, if I might backtrack, because there's been some really robust conversation in the chat with regard to what are some of the strategies that participants are using to achieve partnership with families in their agencies. And so I wanted, and there was one question too that I would like to toss out to you, and I'll give what my thoughts are on it as well. But among what we're seeing in the chat, we're starting or already having a parent council. This is an excellent way to involve families in the actual running of the programs and creation of policies and practices. We have clients who have partnered, whose providers have partnered with schools and community resources, including parent inclusion, creating a youth and family advisory committee. A lot of what we are seeing is elevation of the youth voice and involving them in the decision-making process as well as true partners. We are looking at including family and youth at all levels of the system of care governance process. And then we did have a question. How do you do peer support without violating HIPAA? And so that question can't be answered in a single way, because it really depends on how your agency is looking to utilize peer support specialists. But I can tell you that we have been involved in actually with FREDLA on major initiatives to work to get peer support specialist certification so that we can actually address another issue that's showing up in the chat box, which is around compensation for peer support specialists. And that is something that is advancing across the country. If it's not happening in your state already, it will be. But there are many states that have moved to have peer support specialists reimbursable under Medicaid. There are also, and I'm happy to say Connecticut just recently passed legislation to certify community health workers and make that definition broad enough to include peer support specialists. Also, there are mechanisms through which you can develop a business associate agreement with agencies that might be providing peer support services. And the really easiest way, though it may not always be something that a parent is willing to do, but a parent can always give permission and can always agree to having someone else involved, to having a peer support specialist. So there are multiple ways to do that. Pat, if you would like to toss in anything that we may not have touched.
Well, I'm really excited to hear that the chat box has been so active, and thank you for taking a minute and pausing in, because this is really important information that people are sharing. And the question, I think around HIPAA, it also leads to a bigger question, which is a question around ethics for parent peer support providers. And I know they're called many, many different titles, but I'm going to use that term. So families who provide parent peer support. Ethics training is really important. FREDLA does offer an ethics training. There'll be one coming up probably before fall. I don't have it scheduled on the calendar yet, but we've had in-depth discussions. So I maybe late summer when we offer that training for people. And the whole issue of funding is a big issue, and we've actually pulled together a national think tank. We've had one meeting, and we'll be having another one late in June around the issue of funding, because there are many, many issues around parent-peer support. You know, what are the rates? You know, how do you arrive at that rate? Where's the equity in the work, you know, and in the funding piece? And also, you know, if your Medicaid is one tool for reimbursement, but there are many, many others. And so we're really looking at this think tank, pulling together some good information about not only ways in which peer support is currently funded, but what are the opportunities in the future. And so once we get done our work, we will be sharing that nationally. So stay tuned. If you're not connected currently with FREDLA, my contact information will be at the end of this presentation. Just send me a note, and I'd be really glad to make sure you're on our mailing list to get all the parent-peer support information you would like. Thank you, Anne. Now to this slide. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Keep the questions coming. We'll try to stay on top of those, in addition to moving with what we have on our slides. So I want to talk to you a little bit about an example where we had an opportunity to have families involved in informing, training therapists. Now, evidence-based treatments and evidence-based practices are something that are at the center of many service delivery systems. And for different groups of parents and families, the outcomes have varied. And so when you're taking a look at some of the challenges that contribute to outcomes that are less than what have been hoped for, a lot of it boils down to what is the family and therapist interaction. And so there was an opportunity for myself and some others to do a presentation a couple of years ago based on some work that was done by Dr. Elizabeth Kanata with Wheeler Clinic in Hartford. And this survey looked at 5 items that assessed family experience with in-home evidence-based treatment models. And what were some of the barriers? What were some of the things that were impeding the engagement between the therapist and the family? The comfort level of having a therapist in your home. How a therapist presents themselves when they're entering into a family's home. You know, the saying is that your home is your castle. And so when someone comes in, and they are not respectful of the protocols and the rules in your home, or they come in and they are judgmental, that from the outset is going to cause some challenges in terms of implementing your EBT. Sustained engagement was another concern. But then again, if you don't feel comfortable having somebody come into your home, you're not going to do that any more frequently than you absolutely have to. And the other is around treatment planning. Now, we talked a little earlier today about involving families in the planning process and in the treatment planning process. So when you have a therapist that approaches a family with the plan already laid out and is telling them what it is that they're going to do, and the family has no input into that, that is not going to be as well received as something that was jointly planned and that gave the family an opportunity to share what they thought they needed, what they see as the things that would be helpful to them, because then that also gives them the opportunity to incorporate their own cultural norms and those things that they are comfortable with and does not impose on them either the values of the particular individual therapist or the organization or agency culture or any others that are not consistent with that family's values. The opportunity to tell it like it is, which is, I'm having a bad day today. And this is probably just not going to work because you can't come into my home and tell me A, B, and C. But it's very difficult for therapists to sometimes accept the real deal when families are telling them how things are going, or even when families are describing what they are going through and it's not being communicated to the therapist in the way that they were expecting to hear it, the way that they were trained that it should be communicated, that it's not using the lingo that they are used to hearing. And so when there's that, there's not good communication. And the other thing that we found is around looking at the family's strengths. So even if a family is facing challenges, you can approach them from a strength-based perspective. Some things are going right. You may have to really work with them to find out what that is, but going in with an attitude of everything is wrong and nothing is right with this family is not a foundation that is going to be conducive to building a trusting partnership and collaboration. So I'm not a researcher, and this slide has the statistics and all of that on it. But what is important here is that 99% positive ratings were in all domains for those models where there was strong agreement that there were these elements that were positive and supportive of the effective implementation of evidence-based treatment models. And also then, some of the conclusions that were drawn was that models that promote positive family engagement and therapists, they focus on strengths, and that the therapist's behavior is often more of an impact on the outcomes of the therapeutic engagement than almost anything else. So how the therapist interacts with the family is sometimes more indicative of how that engagement is going to turn out than really taking a look at whether they are, in fact, dispensing the EBT with fidelity. We hear a lot about that. And so many times it's not just a fidelity issue, it's around how is the therapist engaging with the family. Another aspect of this is around, if we know that these are the kinds of factors that impact the therapist's relationship with families, then how can we use that family voice to help in pre-training of therapists? And so this is family voices in the classroom. And so it was really, for me, to learn about this work, I thought was really, really exciting, because it was an opportunity for families to go into pre-training settings and tell therapists who were getting ready to go out into the field what these concerns were, what were some of the challenges, and what were those things that made them feel uncomfortable, what were those things that relaxed them and enabled them to be, you'll hear this word again, to be in partnership with the therapist, the family and the therapist in partnership, so that the family had an opportunity to identify its treatment plan and goals, and that how they were going to accomplish that. And so really It was around how family voices in the classroom could be helpful, how they could improve the experience and impact of treatment, and what can therapists do to promote partnership with the families. And so it also then expanded into community trainings, because we want to make sure that partnerships, as we said before, are two-way. And so you want the family to also understand what the expectations are for them and what they could realistically expect the outcomes to be from a successful engagement in in-home treatment models. Another piece of it was that there's an alphabet soup out there of evidence-based treatment models. I can't begin to name them all. And if I started and didn't name them all, I would be in trouble. But, take any three letters, put them together, and you're probably going to have either an evidence-based treatment or practice or something that's evidence-informed that's in the clearinghouse that is out there. And one of the things that was identified was that your referral sources are sometimes not really clear on the distinctions between the different evidence-based treatment models. And so then making their referral, they are sometimes not referring the family to the treatment model that is best suited to them. And so then when you have this misfitting of model to family, you again are going to have disappointing outcomes on all parts, because the therapist is not going to be able to be as successful and effective as they would like to be. But even worse than that, the family is not going to benefit from that treatment model, and outcomes are not going to be positive for them. So I would like to ask at this time if you can just give a little bit of thought around how you might be able to be innovative around how you are helping the workforce at your agency to develop its skills around engaging with families by listening to families. Let families tell you about what makes them comfortable or uncomfortable. So you should be taking a look at how your team members, your staff are engaging with your family, not only from their perspective, but most importantly, from the perspective of those children, youth, and families that you are serving. You're building bridges. You're building bridges between your service delivery personnel. You try to reach them early in pre-training and in-home practice, building bridges.
Thank you, Anne. I think we have to think about, when we talk about points to ponder, we really need to think about agencies, both at the agency level, how families are engaged at the agency level, as well as families who are employed, not just families who are receiving the services that we've talked about, but families who are employed, and the whole management structure, sort of at that policy level with agencies. So we know that it really requires leadership to infuse that core set of values. We know that it's good practice to include product end users in design, development, promotion of quality feedback. If Nike, and I couldn't even begin to name all of the companies who have done a really good job at that. They've used folks, the input and the feedback from folks in the design of many, many business opportunities and products that they sell. What started out as a pair of basketball shoes has now turned into yoga wear and maternity wear and headbands and headgear and all kinds of things that are a little bit of a stretch away from the basketball court. And so by being able to really incorporate the voice of people who were using their product, they've been able to meet the need and shift their products to meet the needs of people. So I'm good in the recognition that time is getting short, and I'm going to go through some of these slides a little bit faster. You will have these slides, but really thinking about how you provide training, mentoring, and coaching. Involve families in translating agency materials and training to include their examples, making sure they really understand the scope and role. Got to understand why you're there and what your job really is, and to make sure that that's clear, and to make sure that all the management team understands that as well. So many times we have seen families be employed in roles that have one title, which may be a parent peer support title, and they wind up making coffee or copies or scheduling meetings. And while that may be a piece of the meetings may be a piece of their work, the other things aren't. So making sure that we really use people's skills for what they bring to the table. So sorry to be a little rushed, but I want to hear from all of you today. And ask you to respond to this poll. Please share the agency strategies that you're using in your agency for engaging families. And Anne, I'm going to rely on you to look at the results of this poll.
All right, they see the results coming in. This is just a reminder to put your questions in the chat box. We will have an opportunity at the end of our presentation. Those questions will be shared with us and we will try to be responsive. All right, just another couple of seconds on the poll. Thank you for all of you who are responding, and may we see the results.
Ooh.
Families as part of quality improvement processes. 56%. This is really outstanding.
Great.
Families as evaluators of system performance, 46%. Families as trainers in training activities. Families as co-drafters and reviewers of requests for proposals.
Awesome.
That is excellent. Families as liaisons or administrators. You all are doing some really great work.
They are, and it's like they've been reading my little secret list here. So you beat me to the punch. Really involving them when you're hiring anyone in your agency, involving them in developing the job description and participating in the hiring process, and supporting them with good information to be prepared to do that is also key. I love that you hit the procurement process, grants, and writing basics. I think it's important for people to truly understand, particularly if we're talking about policy groups, to clearly identify the scope and authority of the group. I think many times families, they may not even get invited to the group. They may get a little note that says, oh, congratulations, you've been selected. And that's not often a big treat, because if I don't understand ahead of time what it is you want me to do, and I'm not part of making that decision, it may not go as well as I would hope it would go. So believing families sometimes believe they have more power to impact change than they actually do. And that can leave them frustrated and disillusioned and feeling a bit set up. So if it's an advisory group, explain the scope of what that means. And it doesn't mean that you're going to change every service out there to be what's, either they think it needs from their personal experience or or the whole system in general. So I think it's really key to make sure folks understand the scope of what they've taken on. And sometimes the role of hosting focus groups and roundtables is so important to get feedback into your agencies. And families are great at hosting those discussions. I think Ann talked earlier a lot about trust, and that's a more trusting environment. I think people feel more free to have those kinds of discussions. So thank you. Says a little bit about the requirements in order for your policy groups to be successful. We're going to talk about some points to ponder in a minute or less. That really members have a collective role versus a personal or agency agenda. Many times people in the past particularly have come to groups with their own agendas, thinking that that's the place to take them. Your agency agenda is your agency agenda. It may not be the agenda of the policy group. And the individual experience of members is connected to a broader constituency. So I talked earlier about people hesitating to ask families, how do you know that? Who said that, right? How can you validate coming to this table and saying this is what families need? But doing the groundwork ahead of time to make sure that families and folks on all the rest of the members of the group really are prepared to work in partnership is key. So here are your points to ponder. It's important to have families of various cultures and diverse experiences to participate in those policy activities. And really, policy groups need to include a couple types of families, not just the broad experience across systems or whatever, but we need seasoned wisdom and current experience, because that's the mix, that's the secret sauce that's going to get you sort of that historical perspective, or the current experience. The person with seasoned wisdom can help translate that current experience that families who are just entering systems now, they can translate that to the policy work being done. So they can be very helpful translators and very helpful mentors and supporters to newer families who are coming to this work. Another prerequisite is really that atmosphere and what it feels like. You guys probably, having read the list of how you're involved, could make a huge laundry list of things. But these are key to really keeping people involved and getting their participation. Some of the examples are not just about the number of people who have the vote, but how are they supported to have their voice be heard, right? How do you make time? How do you check in? How do you make sure they have great information ahead of time? There's nothing worse, and I bet every single person on this call has probably had and attended a meeting where a huge stack of paper was put in front of you and you were asked to make recommendations on it, within the next 5 or 6 minutes. And there's not anything more unfair than that. It doesn't help you make an informed decision. So getting that information out in a way that people can understand it, digest it, and make decisions based on it in a timely manner is really important. So I'm going to ask Ann to share some important things that they did around policy in Connecticut. Thank you, Ann.
Well, thank you for everything that you just covered on that points to ponder. I would like to point out one that I think deserves an extra area of focus. And it's around ensuring that there's representation from diverse cultures. They bring a richness to the table, but it also helps you to anticipate some of the challenges that your decisions might have for subpopulations or groups of service recipients that you might not be thinking about. And so having someone who can share with you different cultural perspectives of your service population is really important. And so I would like to just share also, when we're talking about policy and this atmosphere that supports participation, we're looking at some key pieces, which are like, making sure. We actually heard about someone in the chat that was talking about including parents on drafting RFPs and where we get a chance to have participation at the policy level, like drafting legislation, voting on governing bodies, and being in a position to have at least 51% of parents on your governing board, testifying and sharing your experiences with legislators and policymakers, being members of system design work groups. All of these are opportunities where parents, family, and youth can contribute their perspectives to make your ultimate product be something that is of a higher quality and of greater applicability to address those needs of populations that are often overlooked, underserved, and marginalized. And this is something that is at the top of our concerns right now, as we've been looking at a pandemic for 14 months. But you need to just be really clear that these are issues that have been at the forefront of why we want to make sure that family engagement is completely embedded into our systems, even at the policy level. So I want to share with you an example of something innovative that AFCAM had an opportunity to be a participant in back in 2018, 2019, and it was to pilot a family voice assessment that Fredla had created. And so we know it affectionately as the FAMVOC. And at the time, you pick out a advisory committee or group, and it met the criteria. We were very fortunate at that point in time to be participating on a state level body that was policy focused. And so we, as pilots of the FAMVOC assessment, used it to measure what was our current level of support for family voice. So this goes way beyond just looking at the numbers so that you can check a box and say that you have family representatives sitting at your table. Very much attuned to what we have with Pat's comment about bringing people to the table, putting a stack of paper in front of them, expecting them to be able to make a decision on that. I'm going to talk a little bit later about a resource that's available through the system of parent training and information centers that are funded by the U.S. Department of Education that will give you some resources for helping families to be able to understand data, to understand how to serve on a board or group, and how to be active on any board that they may be participating in. So what was the FAMVOC assessment looking at? So it was taking a look at 4 themes: overall vision and commitment of the entity, the collaborative approach, empowered representation. And so I will just talk about it one more time. just having parents and youth sitting at your table is not empowered representation. So are they fully aware of what's being discussed? Are their comments and questions addressed? And are they given the same level of consideration as questions or comments from any other of the participants on that particular board? And then theme 4, support of family members' participation. And that can be a number of different things. That could be, is your meeting held at a reasonable time, or is it held 8 to 4 because that's the time that you have your agency and system people working, although that's not a good time for family members. So expanding beyond that. I also would like to just kind of point out, we'll talk about it a little bit later as well, when we're talking about innovation and we're talking about the pandemic, one of the things that we have learned from that is that virtual platforms, while they don't afford us the opportunity to interact personally with folks as frequently as we might like, and maybe not, but it does allow for families, community members, and youth to participate at a level that they were previously unable to do. And so that is something that, maybe in future iterations of family voice assessments, we'll be taking a look at how creative are those boards and commissions in incorporating virtual platforms to expand reach and to facilitate participation by families. So what came out of our FamVoc pilot that we did in Connecticut? What were the findings? So this was conducted with an advisory board of 45 members. We were able to get 47% response rate. So 21 responses completed the FamVoc survey. We had, on a 5-point scale, with 5 being the highest, a 3.30. Now, I do want to caution any interpretation around these numbers, because when you complete this family voice assessment, and it's going to be something that Pat will talk about and provide as a resource, because Fredla has this validated, and it is something that is being provided for the use of boards and committees to really take a deep dive look into how they are supporting family participation. So these are indicative, they're indicative, but once you complete the FamVoc, you get a rather extensive analysis thereof. So the numbers that I'm throwing up here, there's a lot more that is beneath them in terms to really understand how do these numbers now translate into actions that you can take to improve family engagement on your board. The estimated mean scores for the 4 themes that I just shared with you, they range from 2.80 to 3.48, which suggests that the advisory board is about midway in its policies and practices related to family voice. Overall vision and commitment, 3.48, collaborative approach, 3.41, empowered representation, we're back to that. When we take a look at our results, empowered representation was the area in which we needed to do the most work, to do the most improvement. And so one of the things that the FamVoc can help you with is it can identify where you need to have greater input from your family and youth participants around what makes them feel like they are more effective, that they have greater level of participation, and can be more contributory and supported in their board participation.
Thank you,
And-
Ann. Because we're short on time, I'm going to move it along a little bit here. The FAM book was developed in partnership with Portland State University. Anybody who would like more information about that can either email me or info@fredla.org and get information about it. Thank you. So we just wanted to take a second and really recognize how innovative, flexible, and responsive you have been during the pandemic, and cheer you on to continue to be that way. And I'm going to flip really rapidly through. And one of the biggest bullets on here is the opportunities with the influx of new federal funding to include you in developing solutions in your state. And I'm going to encourage any communication you'd like or questions around that you put them in the chat box now. So, Ann has kindly put this bullet in there so we can pay attention to that. You don't want to miss opportunities in your own state around engaging families, and make sure that you also have her contact information. These next slides, I suspect you're going to be able to download the slideshow, and we've provided, other staff have provided guiding questions as a framework as you move forward with your strategic planning and governance, your fiscal planning, sustainability, communications, messaging, and partnerships, and your evaluation and CQI. These guiding questions are wonderful as you continue to do your work in the field and in service delivery and in youth and family leadership. You have references and our contact information. You have a slide with that, so you don't need to write that down. And I'm going to leave it at questions. Thank you.
All right, there are two questions that came in, Pat and Ann. One was, can you talk about strategies for inclusion of young children in leadership? Most of the resources available are tailored to middle and high school youth, but what about young children, say, from the ages of 3 to 10?
So one thing that I really want to point out that Fredla's been doing a lot of work in the infant and early childhood space, and actually has helped a national group do work in that space around engaging families as well. And I wish I had anticipated that question. That comes with age, I confess, because we do have some great resources for that. You can visit the Fredla website and see some of our new tip sheets and briefs that have been developed. And for specific questions, I'm going to cite this email address, so you will need to either type it or write it down: jwalker@fredla.org. And Jane, I don't even know if she's on this group, but if you are, please feel free to weigh in on the chat box. And other folks who are really engaging families of young children, if you have specific strategies you found effective, please do that as well. A lot of times, making sure pediatricians' offices have great information to share on nurse home visiting programs for newborns, around the developmental stages of and when to approach your pediatrician, because you think there might be a problem developmentally that maybe, your doctors only see your kids every so often. You see them every day. So really taking those opportunities to educate other people, and feel free to ask questions, when you're parenting a young child, particularly your first child, and I'm sorry, no two are alike. I had 4. But, always feel free to ask questions and seek out information. But go to where young families go and make sure that they get the information that they need.
Okay, and here's the second question. There was a lot going on in the chat about this as well, but one individual asked, about how parents are paid for participation when sitting on committees in various levels of the system. Some of what I saw come up in the chat were some reimburse for travel expenses
Right.
or provide meals.
Yep.
They offer goodie bags if they're not paying, and or there was one individual that commented they actually pay $35 for families sitting on committees. So I just wanted to toss that back to you and Ann and see if you had any other thoughts about that.
So those are all examples of, I think, escalating and improving methods of acknowledging that family and youth are to be recognized for the contribution that they bring to the table. And so initiatives to ensure kudos to whoever is paying the $35 an hour, that's excellent. But you do see that there are opportunities to build stipends into any family or youth service on a board or committee. And really, ultimately, what we want to do is to get to that place where family representation, peer support, whatever the titles are, that they're recognized for the professional expertise that they bring to the table. And yes, they do get trained. In addition to some of the training that Fredla offers, I did put in the chat the link to the National Parent Training and Information Centers Hub. Every state has at least one parent center that is focused on providing training and resources to families and professionals. It is funded through the Office of Special Education Programs at the U.S. Department of Education. AFCAMP is there, but they have a very helpful tool there, which is Find Your Parent Center. So you should be taking a look there for resources. And then also there are 11 statewide family engagement centers that are available as well. If I don't get that into the chat before we close, I will make a way to make sure that the link to the statewide family engagement centers are also provided to you, amongst any other resources that might be helpful. I would have you take a look there in particular for some trainings, leading by convening and serving on groups, which can help to provide resources to strengthen and build up our family and youth as they endeavor to become true partners in the system of care, in the delivery of services, in agency level, and at the policy-making level.
Thank you. And I know some places, particularly for the policymakers who are on today's call, funding for family participation to solve those challenges that you might have with actually paying for it yourself is to contract with your family-run organizations to support the voices of families and the readiness of them to participate. So paying for stipends, reimbursing for childcare, whatever your policies say that you will cover. They can manage all of that in a far less complex way than it might be for you too. And also a lot of times that's been paid for with block grant monies, other federal grant monies, and sometimes just your fundraising efforts can get you there. So thank you for participating today. And I appreciate the prompt by changing the slide. Thank you.
I'd like to thank our outstanding presenters, Pat and Ann, for sharing their expertise and strategies with us today. And I also want to thank our interpreters, Ashley and Addie. And thanks to all of you for joining this segment of Training Institutes Live. If you haven't registered for one of our 3 workshops beginning at 3:30, it's not too late. The registration link is in the chat. We would appreciate you taking just a few moments to complete the evaluation for this workshop using the link that is posted in the chat. We take your feedback seriously and it will help us to shape upcoming series. As a reminder this summer, take us whenever and wherever you go. July and August workshops will be released the first week of each month and available to you all month long. Listen and learn to select workshops of your choosing or listen to them all. The link to the workshops on the website is posted in the chat. So again, thank you for joining with us today, and we look forward to seeing you. Have a great summer.